All right. Hello, everybody. Give them just a moment to get settled here. Hi, I'm Josh Simmons. I'm with the Google Open Source Outreach team and with the Open Source Initiative. And today I'm here to talk about learning by doing. So learning how to build software, learning how to build interfaces, learning how to write documentation through contributions to open source. So a little about me. I am a web developer. I spent about 10 years doing freelance web development, ran a small agency, ran a startup into the ground, as one does. And then I worked as a community manager and now am at Google. And one of the things that I did for many years is I built Drupal and WordPress websites. So I was a site builder and did some level of glue to make these applications work. So most of my development was glue, and nobody really needed to, nobody else needed to work on these projects. So I didn't use version control. I didn't have tests. Accessibility, not a great track record. Security, also not a great track record. And so for the majority of my career, the development that I did was sort of in isolation and not of a great quality. It got the job done, but certainly wouldn't pass muster if I were trying to work in a team or make a contribution to an open source project. So in 2012, after my startup laid me off, I spent some time contributing to open source for the first time. So while for many years I had been using open source software because it's the tools of the trade, I hadn't really been contributing to open source software. So what I did is I built a very simple Drupal module. And I have to say, the learning experience was incredible. Never had I been held to the level of standards that other developers expect a person to code to. So for many years, while I learned little bits at a time and I could do development, I was not a very good developer, basically. And so since I've started contributing to open source, I've learned a lot and very quickly. So that's the thesis behind this talk, is that a person can learn rapidly by getting real-world experience while contributing to open source software. So my hope with this talk is that for educators, for project leads, for people who are interested in mentoring people and growing the free and open source software community, that you'll all leave here with a sense of resources and some things that you can provide to students or just junior developers or people interested in getting into the industry. You can provide them with resources for doing that and learning while getting their hands dirty. So there are a lot of resources that, I should say, that's where to find me. My Twitter handle is somewhere on that slide. There's a hashtag in case anybody cares to tweet about this talk. I gave a talk similar to this at PyCon AU and tweeted a bunch of resources using that hashtag, so you can find those links there. But the slides are available at that link, so you can revisit it later if you need that. So why? Why should people learn through open source? Well, there's my experience, and then there's the experience that the stories that I hear through my work on the Google Open Source Outreach team. So we run, for instance, Google Summer of Code, and we run Google Code-In. And these are programs where we partner open source projects with students so that the students can learn while contributing to open source. So they're getting their hands dirty, they've got mentors to support them through the process, and in the end, they have real-world experience. They've been exposed to what it's like to actually work on a team and produce more or less professional quality results. So first, I want to go over some programs that are structured programs that students and other people can participate in to learn while contributing to open source. First, there's Coder Dojo. Now, this isn't necessarily specific to open source, but it's just so pervasive and so well established that I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. Coder Dojo, last I checked, they had like over 100 chapters in Australia alone. And so this is an opportunity for These are like physical, in-person clubs for young people to get their hands-on with technology. Of course, there is Google Summer of Code and Google Code-In, which are the programs that I work on. A little about these programs. Google Summer of Code has been running for 14 years, or we're going into our 14th year. Over that time period, over 13,000 students have worked with over 600 open source projects, I want to say, producing, yes, I know lines of code isn't a great metric, but producing over 30 million lines of code, which is just kind of astonishing. The Google Summer of Code program is for students 18 and up who are in university programs, and the students work with the mentor from about May to August to build some sort of project as a contribution to open source. And students are paid a stipend for their participation in these programs, which is really helpful insofar as it allows them to focus on their work on these projects rather than having to worry about juggling that and like a part-time job. Google Code-In is a newer program. It's, I think, going into its 8th year now, and Google Code-In is focused on teenagers from ages 13 to 17. And it's structured as a contest, so rather than applying to it and being paid, these students can select from a number of tasks that these open source projects define. Tasks include things like graphic design, quality assurance, user research, outreach, development, writing, all of the above. And so students can find projects that tasks that they're interested in, tasks that they think they can accomplish, and tasks that challenge them and stretch their skills, and they can use those to learn as they go through the program. I'll note that Google Summer of Code is summer in the Northern Hemisphere. So that may be challenging to students in Australia and the Southern Hemisphere and their schedules, but there are students who still do it, and I would encourage you to check that out. Right now, we're accepting applications from open source organizations. We'll be announcing those next month, I believe, and students can apply in March. Google Code-In, we just wrapped up, and that runs from mid-November to mid-January every year. Another program, Outreachy. Outreachy is very much inspired by Google Summer of Code. Outreachy, however, focuses on underrepresented people in the industry. So Outreachy was founded specifically to bring women into technology. However, now in places like the US, they are also bringing racial minorities into the program, racial and ethnic minorities. And it's structured very similar to Google Summer of Code insofar as there's a period of time that they're working on a project, they have support, and it's paid. Another program, probably inspired by Google Summer of Code. It turns out that there are a lot of programs who have used this as inspiration. Rails Google Summer of Code isn't necessarily specific to Rails. Rails, of course, being Ruby on Rails, the web framework. It's also different insofar as people work as teams of 2 on projects. Some of them are paid, some of them are not. Now, before I move on to issue tags, I just want to say that structured programs are a really useful way for somebody to get experience contributing to open source when they really don't know where to start. If they are starting from 0 and they're not comfortable with technology, or they're just sort of paralyzed by all the options in front of them, these structured programs are a great way to pair them with a mentor, give them a set of options that they can wrap their mind around, and after that, they can sort of take a self-guided approach to learning and contributing to open source. Issue tags are another great way for people to find things to work on. So issue tags are things that are used to, like labels that are put on issues in projects. So for instance, a project might have documentation and somebody opens a bug and they open a bug because there's a problem in that documentation, and they might put an issue tag that says first timers only, or beginners welcome, or something along those lines. And so you can use issue tags to identify tasks that are newbie friendly, that are great for people who are new to a project or new to the technology, a way for them just to get started. And I'll say also that issue tags are a great way to just do something small and bite-sized to get one's hands dirty so that they get comfortable in a community and with a project, and they understand what processes that project uses. I can say that when I first contributed to open source, it was super intimidating. There's like a serious process for accepting contributions and vetting them. And so even if somebody is comfortable with the technologies, they may not be comfortable with the processes. So finding a entry-level task is a great way to learn one thing at a time, learn the processes, and then use their skills in the technology in that project. So there are a lot of issue tags. I'm going to share a few resources that aggregate issues that are for first-timers. There is first-timers only on Twitter. There's a website that goes along with that. They aggregate issues from GitHub that have tags that are known to be targeted at first-timers. There is Your First Pull Request, another Twitter handle, also a website to go along with that. Both of these resources will aggregate issue tags that are great starting points. So whether it's you or a student or somebody you know who wants to get started, these might be great resources to point them at so that they can find a place to start. And upforgrabs.net. This is another resource that will aggregate issues for people to get started with. So some projects are more newbie-friendly than others. And I want to call out a few specific projects that I know to be welcoming, that I know to have a great mentorship program, and to be really ideal for people who are new to the industry or new to the community. First up, Beware. Beware is, well, first I'll say, Beware is really cool. Beware is basically allowing people to use Python all of the places. So you can use Python to develop native web apps, or native applications on mobile. You can use Python in the browser. So if you ever thought like isomorphic JavaScript was cool, Beware, also very cool. It's also a super welcoming community. They are really keen to, anybody who's interested in contributing, they'll do everything they can to help that person get involved and make their first contribution to open source or their project in particular. Beware is also represented here at LCA. The project maintainers are here, and I'm sure they would love to talk to you if you're interested in connecting with them. Habitica is a RPG for building better habits. I think it's based on mobile phones. It's a mobile phone app. Also a super welcoming community. They're great at bringing new people in. And also it's just kind of a cool tool, right? Then there's Hoodie. Hoodie is a framework that makes it easier to build offline functionality into web applications. Also, super welcoming. You'll see them often at sprints. And then there's Public Lab. Public Lab is yet another really cool project that basically it encourages citizen science. And they have all manner of projects under that umbrella. Highly recommend it. Tim Videos, personal favorite. Tim Mithro Ansel, who is the Tim behind Tim Videos, is here at this conference. He's currently running the FPGA mini-conf, which I'm pretty sure is sold out because it always is. It's awesome. And the reason that LCA can record and stream talks so quickly, not only because these people right here working the video cameras are excellent, but also because Tim Videos has created software, free and open source software and hardware to support the recording and streaming of a video. It's It's basically magic. I used it at a conference I ran recently, and it made it so much easier, regardless of. I'm going to stop gushing about Tim videos because I could go all day about that. But I highly recommend checking it out. It's a wonderful project. Tim's here at this conference. So what's this about? There are a lot of other really welcoming projects that are great for newcomers. And what I like to do to find those projects is see who has been involved with programs like Google Summer of Code, Google Code-In, and Outreachy. Because the reality is if a project has participated in one of these programs, they have necessarily structured themselves and evolved such that they're welcoming for newcomers. They've thought hard about what it means to be new to their project and what types of projects and processes and mentorship and support are needed to bring those people on board. So you can bet that if a project has ever participated in one of these programs, they're probably going to be better than average at welcoming newcomers. So a little more about why I'm recommending these projects and about what makes a project particularly welcoming and good for newcomers. Documentation, documentation, documentation. Cannot emphasize it enough. Documentation for users so people know how to actually use the thing. Documentation for contributors so that they know how to help. And this is really critical. The better your docs, the more time you spend on your docs, the less time you spend answering basic questions in IRC. You'll still get those basic questions, but you can at least point them to a link with the answers. Documentation is one of the most effective multipliers for making it easy to. It just helps your project scale as you build that community. And so these are two common traits. If a project has documentation for users and for contributors, it tends to be better than average at bringing new people on board. Gratitude. There's a lot to be said for the culture of a project and the community around a project. Projects that I've recommended tend to be welcoming and gracious and thankful. Even if somebody opens an issue or asks a very basic question, none of those projects are going to say RTFM, read the damn manual. They're going to say, hey, we have a resource for this, we have answers, and let us help you. And they will thank people just for opening the issue or asking the question, because that's expressing interest in being a part of the community. A community that instead just drops a link in the response and says nothing, or just says go away, or whatever, the person's not going to come back. This person's coming here, they want to help, they want to use your software, so be gracious with these people, be kind. Responsiveness. Now this can be really challenging because open source is people, and people have lives outside of open source. Oftentimes open source maintainers are pretty heavily burdened with the responsibilities of maintaining their project, of reviewing pull requests, of making decisions, arbitrating things in the community. But responsiveness is really important. If an issue or a comment is there, waiting there for days or weeks and never gets a response, that contributor is going to go away. So that's another really good trait to look for. Code of conduct is super important. Codes of conduct are not just for conferences and meetups, they're also for projects. Codes of conduct help define define what professional and good behavior is in context of a project. And they're critical because everybody comes from a different background. Whether that's your family, your culture, whatever it is, everybody has a different idea of what's acceptable. And so codes of conduct just make it super clear. This is okay, this is not, this is what will happen if you behave in the wrong way. So code of conduct is a way to make sure that a community has a resource to fall back on when someone runs afoul of those norms. A community that has put thought into writing a code of conduct is probably the kind of community that's going to be welcoming and be better on these other things. And mentorship. All of these things are sort of interrelated. A project that, all of the projects I highlighted really take mentorship seriously. So these are things that you can look for when you're examining an open source project and wondering whether you should recommend it to somebody. Of course, friendliness. I touched on that when I was talking about gratitude. Just be nice. Like, people, this is a community of people. It's really easy to get caught up in getting things done and saying like, no, 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 this is wrong. This is not the way to do it. And it's so easy for that to be a negative experience for people. So just make a little extra effort to be friendly. You know, we all know that text is a challenging medium, and an email that is in a neutral tone is going to be received as maybe probably negative rather than positive. So just making an extra step to be friendly can be really, really helpful for bringing new people in. So I've shared a lot of resources, a lot of programs, a little bit about issue tags and projects, the characteristics that make a project welcoming and ideal for newcomers. There are a lot of other great resources, and I want to highlight, for instance, opensource.com. Opensource.com is a media outlet that is run, backed by Red Hat. Great place to find open source news. They also have like Open Source 101, a lot of guides there that I highly recommend. OpenSource.guide is a much newer project that is started by GitHub, but is not necessarily owned by GitHub. It's an open source project unto itself, has guides on how to create a welcoming community, or how to start an open source project, or how to contribute to open source. So OpenSource.guide is a useful resource no matter a person's role with respect to open source. And teachingopensource.org is a project specifically for instructors, particularly at universities, to collaborate on building curriculum, building open source into their curriculum. And they have a special focus on humanitarian, free, and open source software, so that while students are contributing to open source, not only are they contributing to the commons so that everybody benefits, not only are they getting real-world experience in the process, but they're making the whole world a better place, because these are projects that are helping with medical record systems in developing nations, or they're microfinance in developing nations. Can't recommend that resource enough. So that's all the content I have for you today. I'm happy to take a few questions, and of course, you can find me online. I'm happy to talk anytime. Thank you. Questions?
So just quickly, could you put up the slide with your URL for this?
Yes, of course. It's way back there. There it is. You're most welcome.
I wanted to ask about Google Code. That's one project I don't know about, and it's really cool how you mentioned that it's actually running over the Australian summer time frame.
Right.
So could you tell us a bit more, maybe a little bit more just about that and how it differs a bit from Google Summer Code?
Sure. So the question is about Google Coding and how it differs from Google Summer of Code. Google Coding is, Google Summer of Code is for university students 18 and up, and runs in the Australian winter, Northern Hemisphere summer. For Google Summer of Code, a student will create a project application. They will apply with a particular project idea in mind, and then the open source projects will look at those applications, and then they'll choose a few, and they'll work on those over that throughout the program. Google Coding is different insofar as it's for students ages 13 to 17, so for pre-university students. And as you noted, it runs during the Australian summer. It runs from November to January. Google Coding is also structured as a contest rather than like it's structured as a contest where students work on tasks. So right this year, there were 25 open source projects, open source organizations that were part of Google Coding. Each of them created hundreds, if not more, tasks that are like bite-sized tasks that a student can work on. There are beginner tasks even to help students just get started. So for instance, there might be tasks about setting up your development environment, or just getting the software installed to start with. then the tasks that they can work on range from coding to quality assurance to graphic design to outreach to, it's like all of the things. It's not just code. And then students have between like 3 and 7 days to complete each task. And if they need more time, a mentor can give them time. And I just mentioned mentor. This is really critical to both of the programs. Open source projects apply to participate in these programs, and then mentors support the students through those projects and through those tasks. So these students aren't like, we're not just throwing these students in the deep end and hoping they figure it out. But they actually have mentors there who are experienced contributors with those projects and who are, have an incredible amount of patience to work with young students who may be very new to this. So Google Coding is, like I said, run as a contest. At the end of the program, every organization chooses 2 grand prize winners. And those grand prize winners, we fly them out to Northern California to Google headquarters to meet their mentors, to meet each other, to see talks from Google engineers and meet Google engineers. And since they're Northern California, we take them for like a day out in San Francisco for some adventure. We want to really reward these students and encourage them to continue contributing to FOSS. So we try to give them some good incentives. Absolutely. And what we find is a lot of students will, these days, a lot of students will discover Google Coding, and they'll do that until they're too old for it, and then they'll do Google Summer of Code. And by the time they've done both of those programs, they're an old hand at contributing to open source, and they've stretched themselves, and they've learned a lot of skills in the process. So yeah, I highly encourage people to check out Google Coding. I think, as you noted, the timing works out even better for people who are in Australia. Yeah, you're welcome. See, how are we on time? Oh, we're fine. Okay. Any last questions?
So a lot of this is assuming that students or people have been learning to code, quite a few years. They're probably at either university level or upper high school at least. Is there anything for younger people who are learning to code? I mean, I teach kids who are using Scratch. And the fantastic thing about Scratch is that you can not only create your own projects, but you can contribute to other people's projects. And you can see all the code from some fantastic project that someone else has made this great game, and you can see all the code, and you can take parts of their code, remix it, and so it's a really fantastic way of students getting used to collaborating. But once they get past doing the visual-based coding, are there other sort of platforms or environments in which students could, collaborate with each other and start to build up their skills if, for instance, they're learning Python or JavaScript or something like that?
So the question is about, a lot of things that I'm mentioning here sort of assume some level of experience or familiarity such that a person even knows what kind of projects they want to work on. They have some background in these things. Often they're more tailored for high school or university students. So the question is, what are the options for younger students who may be brand new? Maybe they've just graduated from working with Scratch, for instance. And the answer, I'm not sure. So I mentioned Coder Dojo. Yeah, right. So there's probably more about that today. Yesterday morning in the opening, the charity that the conference is sponsoring is Code Club Australia, I believe. And I got the sense that that is for younger students.
It's mostly doing Scratch too. It's mostly
Okay.
just an introduction.
Okay.
So once kids have got past sort of introduction, that's where there's, I think,
This gap here, right? There's a gap sort of between the Scratch and the Google Coding, in their preteen years or what have you. I think that might be where Coder Dojo really comes in, and I haven't looked at how many there are around, how many chapters there are around Sydney. Really, not many around Sydney.
No, there's code clubs.
Okay, code clubs.
There is one code dojo at Parramatta, but it's pretty much like a code club.
Okay.
There's not much else.
Okay.
It's mainly, there is some things occurring, but they're all city-based.
Okay.
So when you get out my way, ain't nothing.
Okay.
But there's nothing that's for the kids out western Sydney, and that
There's not
there's
even that much in the city.
yeah. Well, there is in the sense that you have wealthy schools that have a lot more
Okay. At
IT
school, I'm thinking
Yeah.
outside school.
Yeah, but like there is a bit in that and some after, there is a bit more after school stuff
Yeah,
happening.
that's what I take. Yeah.
And then there is a project that does occur out in Western Sydney that I've worked in, but that's specifically for children on the autism spectrum. Yeah.
So it sounds like, just to summarize the discussion from the audience, it sounds like there's not a whole lot of coder dojos in this area. It sounds like there are not a whole lot of opportunities for these younger students who have maybe experience with Scratch, but they're not necessarily ready for Google coding or whatever those next steps are. I'd love to take that question offline and see if I can find some resources, and if there really is a gap, then maybe we just need to find the right people to light those fires.
Yeah, but again, it's just teaching. It's teaching you the skill. It's not collaborating on building projects. That's what I'm talking about.
So, okay. So I'm going to summarize just real briefly, and then we'll wrap up here. Nick in the back mentioned that not even universities do a great job of teaching students how to collaborate. And I have to say, this is one of the reasons that I'm kind of like, I've drank the Kool-Aid. I'm like a true believer in learning by contributing to open source, is that forces people to work in a team, right? And it not only forces them to work in a team, it forces them to write code that can be, or make contributions that are part of a greater project, makes them work with people across time zones, makes them learn how to use version control, write tests, things like that. So really, like, contributing to open source is a great way to learn and stretch oneself once a person has some of the skills, and get real world experience such that by the time they get out of university and they're looking for jobs, they know what they're doing. Not all of their experience has been creating projects in a sandbox for an assignment and then moving on to the next thing. They're actually contributing to something that hundreds, thousands, millions of people might be using. And they can, because it's open source, they can put it on their resume, and people can look at the code or their contributions to these projects. Anywho, I could gush about this for a long time, and I would love to talk to people in the hallway. I'll be at the conference all week. But I think it's about time for lunch. So thank you very much.